I see a million my Dope Pro compressor preset videos on YouTube. It's like, well, what are you going to feed into the microphone that goes into the compressor? That's what matters.
I'm excited to welcome back Craig Anderton, author, musician, and a legendary music production educator. In part 2 of our conversation, we dive deeper into production and why great recordings begin long before any plugin is added.
There's a lot more to vocals than just setting levels or dialing in a compressor or whatever. There's an art of vocal production as well as the technology.
He explains that great vocals are not built by processing alone. There's an artistic side to shaping a performance, and that's what separates a technical mix from a powerful one.
I've been really doing a lot of microsurgery on vocals. My main secret weapon with vocals is
Today he breaks down how subtle adjustments can lift a vocal without relying on a slew of plugins. By the end of this conversation, you'll understand how to approach vocals with greater control, clarity, and musical intention. Stick around. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is the Inner Circle Podcast. Let's talk about your vocal book.
Yes.
I know you spent a lot of time putting that together, and from the little we talked about it, you have, I don't want to say unique perspective on it. Oh, maybe that's true, but you've analyzed it more than just about anybody I know. So tell me, what got you started into that? What made you want to do that?
Well, I used to not sing. And, but I've worked with some world-class engineers and producers over the years. I mean, I've learned an awful lot. I don't want to name names because it sounds weird, but also I'd forget somebody and feel bad about it because I just learned so much. I mean, I wasn't born knowing this stuff. You know, I was in big studios and I looked over their shoulders and, I paid attention and I asked questions and they were generous enough with their knowledge to say, yeah, Craig, here's what you do. What really turned the corner for me with vocals was I was interviewing Steve Perry from Journey. And I think he has an amazing voice. I mean, he does that Sam Cooke plus voice. And I was saying, so, I'm trying to learn how to sing. And he spent like about an hour after the interview giving me tips on vocals, which I thought was extremely generous. I mean, I was just there to interview the guy, but he could tell that I really wanted to, and he told me some stuff about, proper posture and what to do with my shoulders and and where to put the mic. And do you want it higher? Do you want it lower? I mean, all these different things. And I started getting good. And then another weird thing that happened was I didn't have vibrato. And so, we live in an electronic world. We have LFOs, we can change pitch. So I started changing pitch and adding vibrato artificially, but then I would do overdubs and my voice started following the vibrato. I didn't have to do anything. All of a sudden I had vibrato just because my voice followed the vibrato that I'd done artificially. So I started learning all these things. And of course, there's signal processing. I don't like to use compressors. I do use them sometimes. It depends upon the material, of course. But in general, my main secret weapon, if you want to call it that, with vocals is using gain envelopes and doing things like being able to pull the end of a line up or being able to make subtle changes in the delivery of the vocal and subtle changes in the timing. One of the more interesting things, one of the audio examples in the book was, I've known Martha Davis for a long time, the lead singer for the Motels, and she owed me a favor because I'd mastered some of her stuff. And I said, Martha, one night, would you get like really tired and drunk and sing some stuff from your songs and not make it right? Like make errors in there so I can correct them? And she said, yeah, sure, what the heck? Because, she's confident enough in her voice. And it was fascinating because I could take her voice and applying it to my voice is one thing. It's just this guy, right, who writes books. But applying it to hers, I could take her voice and I could say, here's the context. And I could show how using gain envelopes evened out the vocals without having to use compression, was able to get a higher average level, was able to bring up the level where it trailed off a bit. And so I've been really doing a lot of microsurgery on vocals. And it's the single biggest difference I can think of how to make a vocal sound better. So
it's just like our forefathers in the studio before automation. That's exactly what they did.
Exactly. Except this is on a really detailed level now. So there's that. And then there's also more and more. I'm convinced that doubling is not always a good idea. I think having a single vocal is best because that's what's going to make the most direct connection to the listener. But I found out some other things too. You'll appreciate this one. I was doing a remix on a Chuck D song, from Public Enemy, and Chuck D has a voice that, so I was asked to remix it. What are you going to do to Chuck's voice? I said, bring up the fader. There's nothing I could do in terms of EQ or processing. It was perfect. It's like, don't mess with it. But I thought, well, how could I have a voice that's so bigger? It's just bigger, but without doubling it or without using delay or something like that. So I found this really interesting technique of taking the voice, splitting it into two parallel paths, and putting a digitally emulated analog EQ in one of the paths, bringing up a low cut filter in it to like maybe 70 hertz or so, 12 dB per octave, something like that. And it adds just enough of a phase difference to decorrelate the signals. So they're not out of phase. They're not in phase. They're not really boosting each other. You can't tell that there's two separate things, but your ears on headphones know that it's two separate sounds. It's like if you were to take two tone generators and put them in headphones, you could tell that it was two separate tones in the left and right channels, as opposed to something mono in the center of your head. And having the vocal be enveloping your head instead of just coming out of the center of your head was a big, big step for me. So that's something I write about too. But the other thing is that I think that the performance is really important. I see a million, my Dope Pro compressor preset videos on YouTube. It's like, well, what are you going to feed into the microphone that goes into the compressor? That's what matters, So I've produced a lot of people over the years, of course, and I've noticed that performers often fall into certain rhythms of when they're good and when they're bad. They start off strong and they get weaker, or they start off weak and then they build up. And I'm sure you've seen this a zillion times. So I wrote about that and when are you going to get the best performance out of a vocalist? When are you going to get the most emotions out of them? And then that allows you to do things like when they're just about to peak based on past experience, that's when you turn up the level in the headphones by 2 dB. And it just brings out they push just a little more. And if you pick the right time to do it, you're going to get an amazing vocal out of it. Or there was one time I was working with a guitarist, actually, classical guitar player, and she was like a machine, man. You just sat her down and, classical guitarists don't get a lot of studio time, right? So they have to get it right. So you just sat her down and her playing was like always perfect. It was just which variation on perfect was it going to be? Well, she did one song and I knew that I'd heard her do it better live once. And I said, oh, Linda, oh man, I don't know how to tell you this, but I forgot to hit record. I'm so sorry. That was a great performance. Can you please just do it once more for me? And she was such a nice person. It's like, she didn't want me to feel bad, She was like, oh, Craig, don't worry about it. It's okay. I'll do it again. It'll be fine. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And it was a fantastic performance. So there's a lot more to vocals than just setting levels or dialing in a compressor or whatever, and that's what I'm trying to convey in that book, is that there's an art of vocal production as well as the technology. And I try to cover both aspects as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, if you don't have the performance, you don't have anything. Really.
Exactly. And you know what? Even what food do you eat beforehand? There's a lot of different factors. What kind of a day did you have? I've also gotten into different mixing techniques. It doesn't relate to the vocal book, and thank you very much for mentioning that, because that book meant a lot to me. The marketing tagline for it would be, if I can make my voice sound good, imagine what I could do with yours. That's what it would be. But like mixing, people are still thinking in linear terms. And one of the things, I have a ton of tips on this, but I'll just mention one, which I call inside out mixing, which is you go to the part of the song that has the most number of tracks and the most amount of things going on, and you get the balance right there. And then as you work toward the end and work toward the beginning, you're going to find that most of the levels are pretty much where they need to be. You may need to add some other things or whatever, but I've mentioned that to a few people, and it's like, it's really changed their lives. I said, you don't have to start at the beginning. I said, and it's the same thing with songwriting. You come up with a great chorus, do the chorus, flesh out the chorus, and then just loop the next two measures after the chorus that are silent, and something will rush in to fill that space, or before. And another thing I love to do when I get toward the end of a mix, I call incremental mixing, which is I'll use like a VCA channel to control like drums or bass or whatever, and I'll just listen. I'll listen to the song. I'll take a walk. I'll listen to it. And I'll make notes on, like, I think the bass is a little loud or something like that. And then I'll just take that one thing and move it down. And it'll take like 10 minutes, just 10 minutes to make the change. And then I listen to it again. My ears are fresh. Because you know the deal. I mean, you can't listen to a mix for more than a certain amount of time and you start losing it. So I've found that I can do projects in parallel very easily that way. I used to do like one song at a time, and then I would go on to the next one, but not anymore because I can have them in various states of completion. The tracks are done, the mix is mostly done, I know where the song wants to go, but those final last stages, I can be working on several of those simultaneously. So more and more, I just don't know if people are taking advantage of the technology. One of the albums I did on my YouTube channel was called Unconstrained, and the reason why I called it that was, if I only had a minute and a half of a song, it was a minute and a half song. If I had 4 minutes, I had 4 minutes. If it was an electro dance Euro thing and that was followed by a thing with blues harmonica, as long as it sounded okay to me, and it's a 20-minute thing with, I think, 11 songs. So some are like 30-second transitions, and I threw it all together, and it got a huge amount of clicks. I mean, I think people were primed to hear something different, even though for me it was just like, well, what if,
Hey, quick pause. Have you ever felt like your mixes are close, but just not quite to the level that you hear from the pros? The truth is, even with today's powerful home studios, it's the techniques that make all the difference. The Mixing Engineer's Handbook, now in its 6th edition, walks you through these techniques step by step, from EQ and compression to immersive audio and the latest plugins. You'll also hear directly from some of the world's top mixers through exclusive interviews and bonus content. If you want your mixes to sound polished and professional no matter what setup you're working on, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the conversation. Do you believe in recording vocals flat, or do you prefer to go through a signal path and make whatever changes as you're recording?
There's a lot of things I do that are not conventional wisdom, and there's a lot of things I do that work for me, and I hesitate to recommend, oh, well, I do it this way, so it'll work for you. I think the odds of that are remote. I always record completely flat. There's nothing. And not only that, when I monitor, I do not monitor through any effects. I don't want any security blankets. I don't want to hear reverb. I don't want to obscure anything. In fact, it's getting to the point now where I'm getting better at being able to do vocals without headphones on by having one speaker and using a ribbon mic and nulling the point at the speakers so that they don't really interfere with the sound. And in some cases, they actually kind of add a nice ambience. So, no processing. I wait till it's time to edit, and then I wait till it's time to mix. And editing and mixing to me are two very, very different activities. But yeah, the vocals go on there completely straight and flat. I mean, I try to use a minimal number of plugins. I'm very much oriented that way. Not out of any sense of needing to be a purist or whatever, but just because I think that every time you add a plugin, it's like a little bit of a scrim. In theater, it's like you're adding or a little dust on a painting. It just you don't really notice it, but there's dust on the painting, and if you get enough plugins in there, the dust kind of adds up. Much of my production, unquote, is getting rid of stuff. Like there's a stage before I mix where I try to get rid of as much things as possible, plugins, tracks, everything to pare it down. I just did a song, the most recent song I posted on YouTube is called Southern Belle. And I think 60% of it is just a bass line and drums with vocals. But the bass line is like a Kraftwerk type synthesized thing. And the drums are like a cadence, like almost like a Louisiana type cadence thing. And then there's like a slide guitar that's in there for a few measures and a harmonica that does a solo, but it doesn't need anything more. It just does not need anything more. And on the other hand, I did a song called Make It Right, and that has, 30 tracks on, which is really rare for me. But if I took any of them out, it didn't sound right. I've interviewed a lot of people. I think it was Quincy Jones who said that the song tells you what it wants you to do. And I found that to be really true. If you just, when I do something, when I'm working on a song, if I can disconnect myself from myself as much as possible and just be influenced by the music, that always produces the best results.
One of the things that I hear a lot when people submit songs for me to critique is quite the opposite of that. And what it is they put every idea that they have, they record them all, but they record them all from the beginning to the end of the song. So you have this cacophony of sound with no tension and release at all, because it's just one solid bar all the way through. But I'm always surprised at how often that happens. And what you mentioned is completely opposite to that. And you're looking for space, you're looking for tension and release.
An interesting live performance thing, which I think is another way to beat AI. I think you will find this very intriguing. I was playing in Germany for a while at the turn of the century with Dr. Walker, a band called Reisdorf Force, another one called Air Liquide. And the way that it worked, I saw them play live a couple times and I was blown away. I mean, it was like, it wasn't Led Zeppelin, but it had that kind of power. It was German electronic, but the power was unbelievable. I became a big fan. Whenever I was over in Europe, I caught as many concerts as I could. And one day he said, "Hey, you want to sit in?" So I sat in on guitar, but it was highly rhythmic guitar. I was using an Adrenaline. It was synced to his MPC, so it fit in. And the way that he worked was he would have like 7 or 8 musicians on stage, and they basically played all the time. And he was running the mixer.
God, I love it.
And he also had an MPC. He had like some drum and bass things happening on the side. But it was amazing because the way he would build the tension and release, as these people were playing, was masterful. And the day that I knew that I'd really arrived as a band member is when he left my favor alone, because I knew him well enough to know when he would want me to play and when he wouldn't. That was a big lesson for me, about the virtues of scaling things back and bringing them forward and adding that emotion and bringing in those level changes. I always said that if I ever have a funeral, I would want him to play at it because his beats could raise the dead. I mean, they really could. His stuff was just amazing. So but a lot of it was that whole tension release thing. And he had a huge following. He pretty much became successful and retired to Portugal. So haven't played with him in a while, but he has an artist collective now that he's put together that does all kinds of videos and fun things like that. But although, you never know where you're going to learn stuff. It's like, I had so many rock and rollers at that time saying, "Oh, well, DJs, they just push buttons." No, I said, listen, you try keeping 4,000 Germans whacked out on ecstasy, happy, start playing at 3:00 in the morning, get off at 6:00 in the morning, and you cannot make one mistake, not one. If you're playing in a band, you hit a bad chord, it goes away. That's whatever. If you wreck a transition, you have screwed up the night. You might as well just go home with your tail between your legs. I say, you try that and tell me how easy it is, and read the mood of the crowd perfectly. Okay. So, but I learned a lot from watching DJ. I learned a huge amount from watching DJs, and listening to classical music. Classical music is still like, I mean, I've produced some classical sessions. There was one harpsichord player I worked with named Kathleen McIntosh, and she was a delight because she always sounded like Bach had come over that day and said, "Hey, Kathy, got a new harpsichord concerto here. What do you think?" "Oh, thanks, Johnny. Great. Oh, yeah, cool." I mean, to her, this stuff was like, it had just come out yesterday. She didn't play like it was a museum piece. She played with like real life and enthusiasm without being a caricature. She just meant a lot. She just put her heart into it. Well, I was doing one album with her and I said, "Look, Kathleen, there's a way you're supposed to record harpsichords, but I want to try something a little different. I wanted to do like rock and roll piano miking on a harpsichord, basically." So I said, "I'll do it both ways, and you tell me which one you like better." So I did 2 test recordings, and I played them both, and it didn't take her more than 1 millisecond to say, "That one." And she wanted the rock and roll. She said, "That's what a harpsichord sounds like." So sometimes you just have to. But I learned that because I had done new age stuff before that, which I got hired for because I knew how to mic things like drums that they didn't know how to do because I'd done rock and roll, So this gets back to your influences thing again. Influences are great. Would AI have picked up all those influences? If you asked AI to generate a harpsichord piece, would it think, I wonder what it would sound like if I generated a harpsichord piece that had been mic'd like a rock and roll piano?
Well, speaking of influences, one of the things I noticed is electronic projects for musicians is still available. And that influenced, several generations now of musicians. Certainly, for me, one of the things, all of your books, your DIY books, I was in on early looking at this thing. Oh, yeah, okay, I think I can do this. So, how does it feel to be someone who has influenced that many people?
I've always backed into what I did. I never like had some grand design where I wanted to become rich or whatever. When I was 3 years old, people would ask me, "Oh, what do you want to be, Craig? Do you want to be a fireman or an astronaut or what do you want to be?" I said, "I want to change the world. I've wanted to change the world." And that was the avenue where I could change the world. I could help change the world. I could convince people, yeah, you can do this stuff. And I want to convince people that they can sing vocals, and I want to convince people that they can unlock the music that's in them, and I can convince them that they have something unusual and interesting to say. It's like when people are always saying, they come up to me after a seminar, "Oh, I want to make it in the music business." And I say, listen, number one, the odds are astronomical. So we need to understand that no matter what you do. I said, but you got to be yourself, because if being yourself resonates with people and you're successful, you'll have a career for the rest of your life because you didn't have to fake anything or be anybody else. People will follow you as you change and grow. If you try to be too calculated and try to do something that's going to be a hit because it sounds like ABBA or whatever, you may get that hit, but then you won't get a second one. The uniqueness of people is so crucial. The best part about electronic projects for musicians is going to a YouTube channel where somebody modified one of my projects, or I see that the Red Llama is a copy of my Tube Sound Fuzz, or, Motu says, "Hey, do you mind if we virtualize your Tube Sound, not the Tube Sound Fuzz, the Quadra Fuzz," which is now, of course, now multi-band distortion is a big deal, but Steinberg asked me, this is another interesting thing about this industry. In any other industry, they just would have taken it. It was dedicated to the public. I put it in a book. They could do whatever they wanted with it. But in Steinberg, with Motu and Steinberg and Isotope for that matter, when they put out Trash, they all said, "Would you mind if we took your idea?" And I was always like, well, first of all, if you're going to ask me, of course you can. But the other thing is that they did a really good job of it. And Steinberg said, "Well, what do you want? What do you want for this?" And I said, "Well, nothing. You don't have any moral, legal, or ethical obligation to compensate me in any way." And that broke their brains. They basically said, "Well, we can't do that. We can't do that." Well, and so they said, "We'll give you a royalty." And then they put "by Craig Anderton" on the plugin, which was kind of a mistake because then people thought I could code, which I can't. But anyway. And then the other thing is that I ended up with a plugin that was better than the hardware, so I wasn't going to complain about that. So putting that book out has yielded vast returns, and then the home recording book, George Martin did the foreword for that, which was like, I mean, how cool is that? Joe Walsh did the foreword for electronic projects for musicians, because these are people who, they saw something that they thought, wow, yeah, I'd get behind this. This is going to give back. Or, someone like Paul Reed Smith, he's always giving back to the industry, to things. This whole industry is kind of oriented that way. So it's not like I'm that different. I just happened to hit on something that really worked, and I've managed to keep hitting on things that really work.
Tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like it's harder to do it-yourself electronics projects these days.
Oh, yeah. Infinitely.
I mean, Radio Shack isn't around for one. It's harder to get parts. And also it's harder to, everything is, built around integrated circuits and, it's a different world. Again, not necessarily better or worse, just different.
Well, you can still do DIY stuff. I mean, a lot of the boutique pedals at a NAMM show or whatever. But DIY takes different facets these days. Like one of the things I'm really into is in Studio One, or it's the FX chain thing where you can put a bunch of things together. Or Ableton Live actually does it really well too. You can put together parallel tracks, have macros that control things, that control multiple parameters at the same time. Like I could make a compressor where I had one knob, that just did everything from like mild compression all the way to this is a guitar sustainer, and I made a project. I was able to make a phase shifter that was very unusual because it combined peaks and valleys. It was kind of like the old Electro-Harmonix polyphase. And to do that with analog electronics would have taken me a week, and getting the parts and going to Mauser Electronics and then finding out I forgot something and going to the Radio Shack that doesn't exist anymore. But with the FX change, I could just put a bunch of EQs together and a bunch of things, flip some things out of phase, connect them to macros, and it was all fine. So I'm still DIY. I mean, the music I'm doing is DIY music too. Everything is DIY for me. It's just that the medium has changed. But you're right. I mean, I don't like that it's so hard to fix things. It's so hard to restore. I mean, people have cool electronic digital things from the 80s and they can't do anything with them anymore. I have a 66 Telecaster. I can still buy strings for it, and that's kind of a powerful thing. So, you just got to go with the times. You just really do. It's interesting because I posted about the Stray Kids movie and I said, my mind has been blown. I posted it in my forum, on Music Player. And one guy said, man, he said, I was exhausted watching that. And I said, that's interesting because I get energized from it. It's, you just have to keep up with things. You can't, in a way, it's, Buddhism is a philosophy. It's not a religion. People get confused about that. But part of that philosophy is the future hasn't happened yet. So you don't want to invest too much into that. The past already happened. So there's nothing you can invest in that anyway. So deal with the way things are now. AI is now. Non-DIY is now. Weird political stuff is now. All this stuff is happening now. And you just have to accept that and deal with it and find your own clarity through understanding what's going on right now and dealing with it. I mean, what else can you do, right?
What's the best way for people to find you and your books?
To find the books, they're all published by Sweetwater. So you go to sweetwater.com and in the search bar and enter either Craig Anderton or Sweetwater Publishing. And I have 13 books out now. I've stopped dealing with record companies, in the 90s. I have the trifecta of royalties. I'm owed royalties from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I've been told it's over 6 figures, but it would cost me more than that to retrieve it. So I was like, okay. So what I do is I release all the music on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/the Craig Anderton, which sounds pretentious, but Craig Anderton was already taken and I couldn't afford a hit. So the Craig Anderton is what it is. It's interesting releasing music like that. And this is something that really should apply to everybody, I think, which is if you think about an immensely successful performer, take a Britney Spears or whatever, and they're selling like, or Beyonce having millions of streams or Taylor Swift or whatever. And you go, gosh, they have like 26 billion streams. And you compare that to the number of people on this planet and the total number of streams. And you realize that even the biggest megastars get only a tiny, tiny, tiny slice of the attention that's out there. I know that my music is niche. I have no illusions about that. And that's not a problem for me. That's what I like to make. But I've noticed that by doing that, the people who like it really like it. I mean, they really like it. And the people who everybody else is like, yeah, okay, whatever, and that's fine. That's fine. Nobody really hates it. So I guess I'm doing something wrong there. But but like I said, it's either like neutral, like goes like, okay, yeah, whatever. Nice, Craig. Guitar sounds good, or they just really can't wait for the next song to come out. So I think it's been educational that way because not having to deal with a record company, not having to deal with lawyers, not having to deal with focus groups and having producers and, people who have cross purposes of what they wanted, or people want to have 14 songwriters. By doing exactly what I want to do, I have found my spot and I make people happy. It's a limited number of people, but they're very happy. And that, that's fine with me. So yeah, CraigAnderton.org is my educational website. It's just one, CraigAnderton.org. I think there's like 300 articles on there. It's all free. I have my forum on musicplayer.com, which is now in year number 31, which I think is amazing. On my website, there is a personal appearances section that shows where I'm going to be. If you want to catch one of my stand-up seminars, as people call them. The best place to interact with me is the forum, probably musicplayer.com. But if you buy any of my books from Sweetwater, there is contact information in there. And that's for 2 reasons. One of them is if people want to write about something or complain or catch a typo or whatever, they can do so. But the other thing is that because the books get free updates, so, they're treated like software. If people have suggestions about what to include in the next book, I want them to write in, because to be able to come up with version, 1.3, which now includes all this information on something that didn't exist when 1.1 came out, is a fantastic gift to an author. You would know this, to be able to say that a book is finished because it never has to be finished. I'm doing, well, of course I'm doing several books, but I put out the vocal book because it had enough material to be a really useful book. At least, I thought so. Now I know that I'll come up with new techniques in the next 6 months, the next year. People will come up with new toys. There'll be new forms of software and corrective things and AI-generated stuff and all that. I can just do another version. I don't have to throw away all that work that I did, So it's great.
Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time